a recording at the Hemmons right
It's
now?
actually still happening right now.
Oh, isn't it?
The orchestra's in there. You can maybe they just tuned for their after their final break. So we're doing a recording for our kids concerts. Normally this we would bring in the kids from U46 and 300 301. And this concert, through the generosity of the Ainsworth family, has continued to be underwritten, and so we've adapted it to be a recruiting tool for fifth and sixth grade orchestra. We've
Oh,
heard from the local teachers that it's been a real struggle to get because they can't bring high schoolers in to demonstrate the instruments, and so they've had a lot of trouble recruiting. And so we're putting together sort of an instrument demo together with some orchestral music for the kids, together with the Imago crew from here in Elgin.
yep. Oh, that's wonderful. That sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah, it's a real adventure. I gotta say, putting an orchestra on stage right now. We're using the whole stage. We put up none of the shells, so we're using up the entire room all the way out to the wings. We've got 42 musicians on stage right now, and the strings are spaced out by 6 feet, and the winds and brass are spaced out by 10. So
Can I ask a silly question about masks?
please,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
nobody, if they're spaced out, how can a musician wear a mask if they're,
So they're asked to wear masks at all times. There's some exceptions. The wind players, we have some specially designed masks that have flaps where they can put their instrument in. We've made some accommodation for some folks that have a lot of difficulty playing in that way,
yeah.
and so for them we say when you're not playing, please have your mask on. When you are playing, do what you have to do to make sound. And all wind instruments have bell covers on them right now. We also have one-way traffic enforced, and so when the musicians come in, they come into the stage door and they go all the way around in one way for strings and another way for winds and brass.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yeah.
it
It's
makes sense. Hey, we got to do what we have to do, right?
exactly. It may be overkill, but we got to take care of the people that matter.
Exactly, exactly. So we have about 36 people here, and I think that we can go ahead and get started. Um, I'll continue to let people in, and just so everyone knows, if you have any trouble throughout the event, just you can go ahead and send me a message in chat, and I'll see if I can help you to the best of my ability. But I will continue to let people in throughout the whole thing, and I will mute people. So if everyone doesn't know, we are joined today by Erik Malmquist. He's the executive director of the Elgin Symphony Orchestra, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the history of the orchestra. Erik, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the intro, and thank you to Elgin History Museum for being awesome partners through all of this. We were actually planning in the 2021 season to partner with the Elgin History Museum on a program that would recreate the time when Sergei Rachmaninoff, the great 20th century Russian composer and pianist, visited Elgin and played a recital at First United Methodist Church. And Elgin History Museum was gonna be great, and we're gonna have to find another time to do it in a non-COVID world. But
We
together
would
we
love
looked.
that. That would be so cool.
Absolutely. And we
Yeah.
looked up through the archives and we found Rachmaninoff coming to Elgin. We found the program that he had done. We found the old Courier articles about his appearance. And I believe, and Ann Chipman can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Dean Chipman may have picked up Rachmaninoff from the train station. Anyway, I know
That's correct.
okay, all right, yeah, yeah. So anyhow, um, yeah, so I'm feeling now that I see my predecessor's predecessor's predecessor on the call that giving a history of the Elgin Symphony Orchestra is extraordinarily daunting because it's a it's a really interesting, fascinating organization that has taken an awful lot to nurture and develop and to end up where we are today. And so I thought, given given the Women's History Month and our kind of unique position as one of the early homes to a female music director, I thought this is a really perfect chance to highlight one of the great choral and orchestral conductors of the last generation in Margaret Hillis. So first, before diving into this, I wanted to take a second to frame a bit who we are and why we exist, where we exist. And so bear with me for a minute while I give a little bit of context. I see a lot of familiar faces, and many people know the Elgin Symphony well, but I've shared my screen here And I thought I'd highlight the three major metropolitan areas of the United States and the musical ecosystems that exist around them. So here you see the salaried orchestras of the city of New York consist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, the New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, New York Philharmonic, and of course the folks that play in the Broadway series. Now, I've pasted here the roster of the New York Philharmonic, and if you take a look at this, you have to assume that on any given roster that looks like this, and the Met Orchestra roster is larger than this, and the American Ballet Theater slightly smaller, but that there are at least there's a huge sublist for every person on this list. And so if it happens that if you see in the top right there that Judith LeClaire, the principal bassoon of the New York Philharmonic, is sick that night, there are 20 people that the New York Philharmonic can call on to fill that spot. That person is also probably on the substitute list for the Metropolitan Opera and for Broadway, for the Broadway series. And so it creates not just this great ecosystem of full-time salaried orchestras, but of really people that lead very interesting freelance lives, who stitch together work, very, very good work in normal times. They can make a very good living playing one night Broadway, one night New York Philharmonic, another night playing with their string quartet, and these people have terrific careers. And from that ecosystem is where we get an ensemble like the New Jersey Symphony, which is situated in Newark, directly across the river. And the New Jersey Symphony draws on the talent that comes from the New York Metro pool, the extras from those players, the freelancers from that area. Similarly, Los Angeles has the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the LA Opera, and then the phenomenal studio scene that exists out in LA. And from that pool, there's the Pacific Symphony Orchestra, which is located in Costa Mesa, which is not so far from LA, and their membership is largely made up of subs and studio musicians. Now here in Chicago, we of course have the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Orchestra of the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the Milwaukee Symphony not so far away, Broadway in Chicago, and we have through a lot of hard work and a lot of growth become the kind of de facto the orchestra that has come to fill that role as the home to the folks that surround the ecosystem of Chicago orchestral music. And that's a very, very lucky position to be, because what this means is that our musicians are not tied to a single contract. There's a great deal of flexibility in their ability to take other work, to sub out. Often we'll have musicians take entire seasons off from the ESO in order to play in the lyric opera. Anytime that lyric opera plays a Wagner opera, we lose about half our string section to them. But what this means, though, is that we're able to draw on a level of talent that is greater than orchestras that are slightly larger than us. And so we punch well above our weight as an orchestra because we have such a phenomenal talent pool. So anyway, that's I wanted to paint a little bit of context about who we are. And there are other orchestras, professional regional orchestras that surround Chicago, but we are quite lucky to kind of occupy that rather rare space as being the sort of definitive suburban orchestra. And this may not statistically be true at this point, depending on how we've done COVID budgets, but we for a long time held the rank as the largest orchestral organization in the state of Illinois outside the city of Chicago. So the orchestra was founded in 1950 by Douglas Steensland at Elgin High School and in Elgin Community College. At the time, it was a community orchestra that was made up primarily of educators from local schools and folks that had other professional lives outside of music. Okay, so let's dive into Margaret Hillis. Pardon my bad transitions here. So Margaret Hillis is a really, really interesting figure, and she's somebody that occupied the podium at a time when it was hardly anybody, hardly any women were on the podium. So Margaret Hillis was born in 1921. She's a native of Indiana. And was fortunate to have come up through that system in Indiana. What's now known as the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University was just then the School of Music. It's one of the largest music schools in the country. It has roughly 2,500 music majors and is one of the largest producers of major talent from the American system. So Margaret studied, she she knew from a very, very early age that she wanted to be an orchestral conductor. However, that really didn't exist at that point, and there are some exceptions we'll talk about in a moment. But at that point, it was absolutely not. It was not a viable career option to be a woman on the podium of an orchestra, and so she ended up going to Indiana to study composition, which was kind of a logical, logical career path if she wasn't allowed in that direction, and was encouraged to have her to pursue choral conducting rather than orchestral conducting. It was looked at as the sort of the woman's place in musical conducting careers. So she studied at Indiana, graduated in 1947, and like so many of us from the field, ended up finding ourselves in New York City. There she did some private study with the legendary choral conductor Robert Shaw, who would go on to become the music director of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and Chorus. And Robert Shaw also conducted what was known as the collegiate chorale. So the symphony chorus is something that exists in certain orchestras, not many, but in New York they don't have a dedicated symphony chorus that sings for the symphony when they, for the Philharmonic when they do things like the Mozart Requiem or the Verdi Requiem. Rather, they use outside ensembles, often the Westminster Choir from the Westminster Choir College in Princeton, New Jersey, or they'll use groups like this, like the Collegiate Chorale. So this group is still in existence today. It's an amateur chorus, but a very, very good amateur chorus that has professional ringers in it. And so anytime the New York Philharmonic does a Mahler symphony that calls for a large chorus, they will use the Collegiate Chorale. So in 1950, when Margaret Hillis was in New York, Robert Shaw was then the music director, and when she began her studies with him at the Juilliard School, he took her on as the assistant conductor of the Collegiate Chorale, which in the system of developing conducting talent is a great way to sort of cut your teeth and to kind of learn from a great master about what it's like to run a rehearsal, to stand up in front of a room, and to command the presence of some people that can be very difficult to manage. And I don't say that condescendingly. These folks are very accomplished musicians, and so to stand up in front of a room of to stand up in front of a room of accomplished musicians and declare yourself the definitive talent in the room to tell you what to do, it takes not only an exceptional amount of knowledge, but an exceptional amount of confidence. So we'll get into some of why the challenges existed for women in the field at that time relating to that. But anyway, this is all to say she worked with Shaw at the Collegiate Chorale. She also prepared choruses for the New York City Opera, which was at the time the second opera company in New York. It is sort of fizzled after some drama in the early aughts. But at the time, it was a really prestigious company. It was run for a very long time by the great soprano Beverly Sills. So anyhow, that was her New York days, and she, through her New York days, this is at a time when Bernstein and Barber and these folks were kind of dominating the scene. If you were kind of in with the in crowd, people got to know you, and she was very well known. She was very well known for her work with Shaw and with the New York City Opera. And so she was recruited by Fritz Reiner, who at the time was the music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, to found the Chicago Symphony Chorus. So the Chicago Symphony Chorus did not exist before 1958. They would have followed the similar model to the New York Philharmonic now, where they used outside ensembles and collegiate groups to fill the role when they needed to put on choral orchestral works. And so Fritz Reiner, when he came to the Chicago Symphony, one of the things he wanted to do was to establish a symphony chorus, and so he asked Margaret Hillis to fill that role. So it was not actually Fritz Reiner who conducted the first performance of the Chicago Symphony Chorus, but rather the legendary Bruno Walter, who conducted a performance of Mozart's Requiem, and then actually a few weeks later. Fritz Reiner returned to the Chicago Symphony to conduct the first time the Chicago Symphony Chorus was conducted by their music director, and that was in a performance of the Verdi Requiem. So this is a picture of an early day photo of Reiner together with the Chicago Symphony Chorus, and I just wanted to, if you can see this clearly, give it a good look, because if you look at the musicians on stage, and I might be missing some here, but I see a second harp player. That's a woman. I see somebody who appears to be a percussionist, and I think I see somebody hanging out in the viola section. That appears to be a woman. So this is circa 1958, 59. And as you can see, there's almost no women up on stage. And I just wanted to share two of my favorite stories from my time in New York before I go on, and that is, I was on the subway and I met a woman with a viola case, and my family makes fun of me. I'm the person that makes friends on airplanes. I am who I am, but I struck up a conversation with this woman. She looked quite old. And she turned out to be the first woman member of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And she talked about when she won her audition. This is before they moved to the new opera house at Lincoln Center. It was the first time they instituted blind auditions, and she was a viola player. She got to the final round where they took the screen down. Auditions are screened so you can't see who's up there. And at the final round, the final two people, when they took the screen down, were two women. And that was when the panel realized that they were either going to have to redo the entire process or hire their first women into the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And in the end, they ended up hiring her. String players were more common than wind and brass players, and this was followed up by Julie Landsman, who was a longtime principal horn of the Metropolitan Opera. Famously, horn players love to tell this story of when she auditioned for the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. They asked her to play Siegfried's Long Call from Götterdämmerung. Michael, help me, Götterdämmerung? Siegfried. Yeah, anyway, it's one of these like legendary horn calls that just goes for miles. It's hard. It's it's high. Nobody does it right. It's ugly. And she was asked to play it time and time again because they just were sure. I mean, she was fantastic. She played a great audition, but they were just sure that she was going to break. And so she played it over again and over again. They wanted to hear it one more time. And she finally said to the panel, "You've heard all you can hear. This is how I play. If you want me, hire me. If you don't, I'm done." And walked out the door, and Julie Landsman became not only the long-serving principal horn of the Metropolitan Opera, but also a member of the faculty at the Juilliard School, and sort of a living legend in brass playing. Now, I say I should make a couple of exceptions. There were some phenomenal women that were on the podium at this time. Sarah Caldwell, who was primarily operatic conductor, conducted at the Metropolitan Opera and had a big presence in the Boston scene. Boston doesn't have a large operatic presence, but she was there when there was a bit of a company. And then Antonia Brico, who was a Dutch immigrant. She was the music director of the Boulder Philharmonic. This would have been back in the 50s. But she had experience. She had guested with the San Francisco Symphony, I believe, and also with San Francisco. New York, Berlin. She did the real circuit. There were a few exceptions, but they were so exceptional and so rare that it hardly ever happened. Now, I don't know, Trish, how you feel about participation, but I wanted to. And I'm going to ask Michael not to answer this question, but I wanted to ask if anybody could guess when the first woman was hired in the Vienna Philharmonic. Of course, one of the great orchestras of the country, or excuse me, of the world, rather. We can even do chat box.
I know I'm watching the chat. Anyone have an answer or a guess? Feel free to unmute yourselves.
It was a harp player, I think.
I think that's right.
And not that long ago. 2000?
Not quite, but very, very close. It was she was hired. Actually, I believe it was a harp and a clarinetist were hired at the same time, and it was 1997. So, in context, it was during the Clinton administration. We had the internet. And so the Vienna Philharmonic, one of the kind of trendsetters of the global orchestral scene, did not have a woman sitting on stage as a full member of their orchestra until 1997. So I think that I don't mean to make this about grievance or about kind of shaming previous generations, but I think it's really important to note that the orchestral scene, not just the podium, was very heavily dominated by men, and so. And as I said earlier, the idea of being accepted by your by your colleagues playing for you as the definitive authority in the room requires respect from those that are working for you. And it was just the trend. The men in the orchestra tended to not respect when there was a woman on the podium, and so they ended up being relegated to the choral role. So anyway. So Margaret Hillis worked with Fritz Reiner through the rest of his tenure. Sir George Solti became later the conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and they worked very well together, won several Grammys, and on a tour of New York, out to New York, they did a Carnegie Hall program with Mahler's monumental Eighth Symphony. This is it's known as the Symphony of 1,000 because it calls for just every possible instrument you could think of, plus a chorus, plus a children's chorus. I think there's a marching band in there. I don't know. It's too much. But anyway, Solti got sick. I think he might have fallen. And so Margaret Hillis had prepared the chorus and was very familiar with the score. And so she ended up conducting this program at Carnegie Hall, which was a big moment for her, and frankly for women on the podium. This was not a light concert with Mozart. This is a monumental piece with one of the great orchestras of the country on what is arguably the most famous stage in our national music scene. So this fantastically patronizing headline appeared in the New York Times the next day saying, "Woman steps in for Solti, wins Carnegie Hall ovation." Bully. Anyway, in 1971, Dean Chipman hired Margaret Hillis to be the conductor of the Elgin Symphony Orchestra. At the time, this was a volunteer orchestra still. It had been, there are some folks that were professional musicians that were in their ranks, but it was largely a volunteer orchestra. And this was a great outlet for her to try and develop an orchestra, and also an incredible fit for Elgin, and set it on the initial path to becoming a fully professional ensemble. So her tenure was marked with any number of firsts. I wanted to just show you her first program, and this is a kind of bizarre program. I think that our programming in orchestral music has become very formulaic, and I think back in the 70s even it was a bit different. I can tell you for sure that I've never seen that last piece ever performed. I'm sure it's lovely. And her final program, which will feature some familiar names for those of you who are familiar with the Elgin art scene, had a piece by Daniel Brubaker, who was a composer born here in Elgin, lived for a long time in New York, and won any number of prizes, and studied with the legendary Nadia Boulanger, and then ended with Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, another one of these pieces that calls for everything under the sun. And at the end of this program, she handed over the reins to who had been her assistant conductor, the young Robert Hansen, who at the time had a full head of hair. I can show you the pictures, and the rest is history. Dr. Hansen, took over and conducted the orchestra for another 35 years. In the generation that followed, there have been some very, very interesting women that have graced the orchestral podium. I've put up two here. This is Maren Alsop on the left. She's, I believe, the outgoing music director of the Baltimore Symphony. She also is the artistic director, I think is what they're calling her these days, in Ravinia. But she's was in that first generation where it was acceptable to hire women at the top levels of orchestral music. And then Joanne Folletta, who was the music director of the then Honolulu Symphony, and is now the music director of the Buffalo Philharmonic. And I, as a point of pride, we haven't released the plans for our upcoming 21-22 season yet, but I can tell you that for the first time since 1985, there will be more women on the podium than men. And that is something that happened without any tokenism in mind. It just sort of fell into place. We were looking for the best possible exciting young conductors to fill our first season after the departure of Andrew Grams as our music director, and the best talent that we could find. I found myself looking at the paper one day and realizing that for the first time since Margaret Hillis, we'll have more women on the podium than men. So I like to think that next season is a little bit of an homage to the work that she did to break that glass ceiling, make room for folks like Maren Alsop and Joanne Folletta, and open the floodgates to this incredible wealth of talent that we now see on the podium for both genders. So yeah, that's kind of my little brief overview of Margaret Hillis's time in Elgin. Trish, what do I gotta do? I think you're muted, Trish.
There we go. Okay. Bob Acker asked in the chat, are you aware the CSO archives have some items relating to Margaret's ESO tenure?
I didn't know about the ESO part of that. I actually had drawn a lot of these photos from the Chicago Symphony Archives, and of course, she donated a lot of her stuff to the CSO. Thanks, Bob. I'll check that out.
A couple of years ago, I was asked to be on a panel at the Gail Borden Library about Margaret, and I was asked because I actually sang under her with the CSO back in the early '70s, and I happened to run into Frank Villela, who's the CSO archivist, and he alerted me to that. And so I went down there and took a look. There may be a couple of folders, a lot of correspondence with the ESO president and board people on hiring contracts and things like that. And how
Bob, you've just made one intern's job incredibly unpleasant for the summer. That's great news. I love that. Oh, Libby, yeah. I've seen some of these. Oh, yeah, this is I don't, because Bob did this too. Okay, sorry. I'm okay. So there's a method that she used, and she must have shared with Bob or maybe Dr. Hansen, her successor, where she had, there's colored pencil in all of her scores, and there were specific colors for when it was the winds were, I don't know exactly what it was, but like when the winds were entering, or if there was a like an accelerando, she would put it in yellow or something like this. And so all she'd have to do is glance down at the score and remember her notes to herself. Yeah.
Eric, do you see the note from Deb Kelly?
See, this I can't speak to. I'm not sure if Anne or Michael are aware. Do you know if they rehearsed at Hemmons when they were out here? Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Eric, do you happen to know when Rachmaninoff came to Elgin, like the date or the month even?
Yeah, it was October. I believe it was October of 1942. I got to find it. It was a year or two before he passed away. But I think that we're coming up on the 75th or the eight. Anyway, yes, I have that date. I'll send it to you.
That would be great, because I think that would be a really I'd like to put that on our Facebook page when the anniversary comes about. I think that would be really interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, so we worked with this scholar from Sydney who actually found the program that he would have performed on that tour. It wasn't in the Courier article what he played, and so I can send you all that information. And we had planned to recreate that whole recital as kind of an homage to Elgin, to the arts as they developed. There was yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
I think that it was the performance, I think, was less than a year before he died. It was not much longer that he was alive after he was here in Elgin.
Yeah. I think
I might be wrong about that. But
no, I think I remember seeing that date and thinking I didn't think that he was around for much longer after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was visited here, and then he went out to LA, which is where he died that same year. So, but whenever that year was, I can't remember. But it was probably, like you said, around 42 or so, not much later.
Yeah. No, I see the question here of whether or not there are tapes. I think the answer to that is no, because I think we actually found it rather. I was aware as a child growing up here that Rachmaninoff had performed in Elgin, but it was very hard to track down that information. There's not a lot of records that were kept, and there was a music society in Elgin that brought a lot of pretty important acts through town, and it was in existence up until I believe the 60s. And so there actually were a number of pretty big performers that came through and played.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
I'll just make one side note. This is Deb Kelly. I graduated from Elgin High in '68. And I have friends who sang with, and my father sang with Margaret Hillis at one point, but I also would urge you all to come out to Denver because Antonio Barrico taught Judy Collins piano in Denver and was part of our symphony tradition. Joanne Folletta was here for the Denver Chamber Orchestra before she moved to Buffalo. And of course, we enjoyed the very start of Marin Alsop's brilliant career. So we were lucky to have all of those in our tradition here.
Deb, am I remembering right that Antonia was from Dutch parentage, but actually born in Denver, wasn't she?
No, she was born, I am not even sure she was born in this country, but she lived here for quite some time. And she had, I mean, like many women at the time who could not be fully employed in what they loved, she truly taught piano on the side. And Judy Collins was one of her students. And Judy Collins always talked about how it wasn't for Antonio Barrico, she would have no career. She was quite a dominant figure still in the 70s when I first came out here.
Sure.
As was Joanne and certainly Marin Alsop. If you've never heard the story of Marin Alsop and the fact that she had to be a math major so she could have another career in case the first one didn't work out, or how her father gave her a baton in high school after he told her there were no women conductors and she cried at the dinner table. They are great, great stories.
Thanks, Deb.
Are you aware that someone is working on a biography of Margaret Hillis?
I've heard about that, and that's a voice I recognize. Well, I can't see. Where are you there?
I can't get my picture on there.
No worries, no worries.
For some reason.
Who's working on that?
I'll try to find out.
Okay, because I think we've got some records that we'd like to. Oh, there you are. Yeah, I see your screen. We've got some records we should probably unearth for them.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. See, I got Michael and Dan Mackey on this call. We've got like literally Elgin history royalty here, and I'm here. I am kind of given a 30-minute PowerPoint to the expert pool.
You did a great job.
Yeah. I have a little story to add, maybe, that my father was the general manager of the symphony for a long time. And, but way back in 1967, I believe, he was trying to establish a relationship with Margaret Hillis, and eventually, kind of in the back of his mind, I think he wanted her to come to Elgin. And in '67, somehow or another, he arranged for her to come and direct a collaborative event that included the symphony, the choral union, children's choirs, and I don't know, a whole bunch of stuff. And it was to do the opera, The Bishop of Brindisi by Menotti. And I think it was held in, I don't know, maybe Larkin High School gym or something like that. So her first time performing or directing something in Elgin would have been back then.
I love that story. Yeah, Michael, go ahead. Yeah.
We used to have a framed copy of the recording that was made.
Oh yeah.
On the wall at the offices.
I've seen some of those. I think I know what you're talking about. I think I know the room that's in. I'm gonna go dig that out.
Inside the frame is the record also, in case you ever want to play it.
Yeah. Gotta find a record player, but yeah.
Do you guys have anyone at the symphony that kind of does your history like they do? They have that at Elgin High School. They have a whole, department dedicated to keeping their history. I think it sounds like you guys do a pretty good job, but is there anyone dedicated to it?
Well, the Elgin Symphony League has been really, really excellent at that over the course of it. And of course, these things turn over generation to generation. But there's some folks that have been members of the league that know the history better than almost anybody else. So yeah, I think that. And now I'm seeing 3 people on the call that I think Libby and Gwen would probably be the best bets there.
Yeah. as long as you guys are writing it down, you got to save it for the future.
Well, there's definitely, I can tell you, there's been excellent record keeping that's been done in recent past, because you can go, there's wonderful photo albums that date all of these cool concerts when Itzhak Perlman and Yo-Yo Ma came through. There's wonderful photo collections that have been kept in the office.
Do people get to look at those, or?
Oh, it's just me. If we're being honest. No, we should. I think that would be a fun. Again, here we are just making some poor intern's life miserable, but that we should make those digital. I think having a digital archive would be a lot of fun.
Are you keeping, Erik? Are you keeping the archives at the ESO offices, or are you housing them somewhere else?
Yeah. No, all of those are in the we have the basement space of the old Woolworths, which is a perfect perfect place for a music library and for archives.
Yeah, there used to be stuff at the ECC, which we then went and we asked them for it, and they gave it to us. So that's in the basement. It might be worth going to the CSO and asking them if they would give us the stuff, give you, I guess, the stuff that it pertains to the Elgin Symphony, so that you have it all in one place.
Yeah.
I would recommend you contact Frank Villella at the CSO archives. He's the one that alerted me to that portion. They have an actual section on Margaret Hillis, and within that a folder or two on her tenure at the ESO. They probably wouldn't be willing to part with it, but they perhaps they could make arrangements to make copies for you.
Yeah.
I would contact him and tell him I sent you.
Sure, I will.
If you need help getting folks to do stuff at the Chicago Symphony, give me a call.
I will.
They ought to give it to you.
Yeah, but you never know. Sometimes I don't blame them. I mean that's valuable stuff, and that they have at their disposal. If anybody's interested, by the way, the city of Elgin has completely redone the plaza. It hasn't been planted yet, but the plaza has been entirely redone out behind me. So for those of you familiar with what that normally looked like, it was a Kennedy-era plaza, which was falling apart, as you might expect, and is now actually really nice. So when we all come back to the hall, it's going to be a different experience.
Speaking of, what's the ESO schedule? I saw on your Facebook page there's going to be Fridays at the farm. Can you tell us about that?
That's right. Yes. So we have a 6-concert, three program 6-concert series called Fridays on the Farm, which is going to take place at Gobert's Farm out in Pingree Grove. They're taking place in May, July, and August. The first concert is a purely string program, and then the final concerts, we're planning to have the whole orchestra in. The venue that we're using is a semi-permanent tent with removable sides, so it'll be mostly outdoors. The walls will be off the tent, but we'll be sheltered from the elements. At this point, we're limiting attendance to 150, but we're really hopeful that we can relax that, because most of these programs are right at the edge of sold out. There are still a few tickets to the May and July concerts. And the May concert will be taking place in collaboration with the Piazzolla Foundation to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Argentinian composer Astor Piazzolla.
Wow, awesome.
Erik, I'd like to mention that Jill and I sang with Margaret Hillis for a few years.
Downtown?
And with your parents.
No, with the choral you did.
Here in Elgin.
Oh, yes. Okay. How was she to work under? I'm curious.
Oh,
she was understated.
her direction was very understated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she could sing bass like you wouldn't believe.
I've heard that she had just the most booming baritone voice.
Yes.
She did.
Oh.
I've heard myriad impressions of her, which I think are probably not.
And she wore black Converse referee shoes under her voluminous gowns.
That's very 2000s Brooklyn. I love it. That's true of her time.
I still remember her saying, "Dan, get me a cup of coffee, will you please?"
Oh, yeah.
Oh, too funny. Oh man. Well, those of you who who are regular attendees will be happy to know I just watched Ross Beecraft, our principal trumpet, walk past the window, and Mark Kuntz walk out with his cello. So it appears the orchestra has wrapped up their recording session, and hopefully we'll have this all packaged and ready to go to schools in 2 weeks.
Nice.
That's very good. I also wanted to let everybody know that we did record your presentation. And Eric, if it's okay with you, I'd like to put it on the museum's YouTube channel.
Yeah, of course.
Great. So if any of your friends that weren't able to make this date and time, give me about a week and I'll put it up on YouTube, and I'll send out a notice through Facebook that it's available.
Perfect. All right.
Anyone else have any questions? Because otherwise, maybe I'll just put in a plug for what the museum has coming up next. April, go ahead.
Because I guess I would like to hear more from the those on the call who actually worked under Margaret Hillis. I sing in a community audition group here whose conductor worked under Robert Shaw. And we often say from Robert Shaw's mouth to our ear, heaven forbid, when we do one of his arrangements. And he talked about how in Robert Shaw's chorus, even the voice parts were ranked like an orchestra. In other words, you had a first chair baritone, a first chair, a second chair baritone, etc. And being both an orchestra and choral conductor is kind of a unique combination. Do you have any comments on that? I'd just love to hear more.
Well, I defer to the people that worked under her. I'd be very, very curious.
It was too long ago for me to remember, but she probably had what you would amount to be section leaders. And with the CSO chorus, there was a proportion that were paid, but there were a lot of unpaid volunteers like myself. But I don't know what the percentage is now. I think it's all paid.
I think that, yeah, and I think most symphony choruses at this point follow some format similar to the one you described, where there's a core of, at least that was my, I went to graduate school out west, and in San Francisco they did that, where there was 35 paid musicians, and then excellent volunteers that staffed the rest of it.
Yeah, if there was a hierarchy in the Elgin Choral Union, it was informal. It was the hierarchy was. Hanson was told by Hillis what he should do, and he did it. And the rest of us.
Yeah. And of course, Eric, you started off with Doug Steensland being part of one of the founders. He was the orchestra teacher at Elgin High School for many years during the 60s. And of course, that's my memory of the Elgin Choral Union and the high schools doing the Messiah every year. So that's just so I don't know that we in Elgin appreciate what a musical tradition we really have, and a nationally recognized musical tradition.
No. Yeah, it was an enormous privilege to sing with those people.
I think I've said to folks since coming back I lived in New York for the last several years, and people in music generally knew where I was from. Not by saying I was from the Chicago area, but I was from Elgin. I think that it's often not appreciated by actually those that live in Elgin and around, that we have a bit of a reputation, thanks in large part to all these folks that we've just talked about. I mean, it takes incredible care and feeding to grow something to what this became.
Deb, did you have any more questions? Anybody else?
May I say something?
Of course.
I've got to say that, so I've gotten to watch the Elgin Symphony since 1995, and really, first I found it to be, there are a lot of different orchestras with a lot of different vibes, and Elgin seemed to have sort of the joy of a volunteer orchestra with the quality of a professional orchestra, which is really something entirely unique in the field from what I've seen. I have yet to see another orchestra that sort of had the vibe of the Elgin Symphony. It's also had the huge advantage of really long-term leaders. Margaret was there for a very long time. Bob was there for 35 years. Andrew was there for, how long was Andrew there? A decade?
There's 8 seasons, yeah.
Almost a decade. So that you've really had the chance to not go in a different direction every day, but that you're able to take an idea and really bring it to fruition. And I think a lot of that are the leaders of the Elgin Symphony. We've talked about Doug Steensland and Dean Chipman, but Ed and Pearl Brody, and Harry Blizzard are also names that can't be forgotten for a moment in what it took to build the Elgin Symphony, and to have a leadership, Ed Schock and Bob Gilliam, who were willing to really go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that the symphony was able to survive and thrive. Erik talked a little bit about the role that the orchestra plays, and it kind of for the musicians and how it's able to pull great musicians from the Chicago area. And part of that, I think, goes back to a decision that was made decades ago when the orchestra realized that there were lots of little regional orchestras that were all trying to figure out how to pay the musicians as little as possible. And that if we could just be the highest paying of the orchestras, just by $1, all of a sudden we would become the choice for the musicians to come to, and the overnight improvement in performance caliber that the orchestra saw through that. And I think also the role that the orchestra played, right? What I thought the Elgin Symphony was best in the world at was bringing wealthy people into downtown Elgin, right? That nothing except for the Elgin Symphony and maybe Elgin Academy brings people from Barrington into downtown Elgin to see what an incredible city this is, like the Elgin Symphony does. And you've got something really to treasure. And first, it's clear you do treasure it. And second, it's something for the city to remain incredibly proud of. And Erik, it really seems to have done a phenomenal job stepping in at an amazingly crucial, no way anybody could have anticipated what a crucial period this was going to be. And my guess is he's going to leave it stronger at the end of the pandemic than it was at the beginning of the pandemic.
Well, fingers crossed about that. And I think that I mean, you're being modest, not saying so, but I think one of those leaders that took the orchestra from a $900,000 orchestra to a $3 million orchestra is Michael Pastrak. So thank you, Michael, for being the kind of ultimate catalyst that took the orchestra and made it what it is today. And
couldn't have been done without Carla, who was on this call as well.
Well, look, and I have to say, I mean, this is, part of my narrative is that I was personally nurtured by this orchestra. I was born into it. My father played for it before it was, before I was born, and we exist in a place. I didn't grow up poor, but I also wasn't wealthy, and we lived far enough away that I would never have had access to the quality of music that was brought to my doorstep, which allowed me to have. To live a musically fulfilled life, and I feel very grateful to the people that grew it, so that never forget what you're bringing to the doorstep of the folks that it matters to. Anyway, well,
it's very true. This is really cool that we have all these people on this call. This is really neat. I'm glad it's being recorded.
Very good. Well, I'm going to go see the orchestra out the door and make sure that nobody got too mad about their stand being 1 inch to the wrong direction. And
that was great, Erik. I can't thank you enough for joining us. Everyone, thank you for joining us on this call. The next event that we have coming up next month, April, is Earth Month. So we have Leslie Goddard. She's going to be portraying Rachel Carson. We're still confirming the date, but if you guys keep an eye on your emails or like us on Facebook, you'll get all the information that way.
Terrific. All right. Thanks.
All right.
Trish.
Thank
Everyone.
you, Eric, so much. Everybody enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.